I thought this was a party! Let's dance!
So I'm gonna make a case today. Not just that 1984 was a great year for movies, but that it was a remarkable year for all of pop culture. I'm gonna argue that 1984 was the single greatest year in the history of pop culture. No qualifications, no asterisks. And here's what makes this argument different from every greatest year conversation you've had. I'm not just talking about films. I'm talking about what happened off screen and on screen in 1984. The decisions that were made, the companies that changed hands, the formats that were launched, the institutions that were born. Because 1984 didn't just give us great movies, it built the next 40 plus years of everything we love. So pop that tape in, I got you, let's go do this. Now, before we get into it, I want to be clear about the standard I'm holding 1984 to. A great year in movies gives you films people still watch. A truly great year gives you films people still quote, still debate, still discover, still have as part of the cultural zeitgeist and our pop culture, and every time you mention them, people immediately understand them, and remember why they matter. The greatest year in movie history has to be clear of a higher bar than anything else. It has to give you franchise starters, genre definers, cultural touchstones, films that didn't just perform well in their moment, but actively shaped everything that came after them. And then on top of all of that, it has to do something that no other year does. It has to change the industry and pop culture itself. It not just with the films, but with all those decisions, the institutions, the specific architecture of entertainment that shapes our pop culture, our shared experiences to this day that we still live and enjoy. And 1984 does all of that, every single part of it, and I'm going to prove it. So let's start with the obvious, the blockbusters that became empires, that were extraordinary. In the summer of 1984, there were 3 films that opened that are still generating sequels, reboots, and cultural conversations 40 plus years later, starting with Ghostbusters. Ivan Reitman directing, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Ernie Hudson, one of the most perfectly constructed summer entertainment movies in the history of cinema. And here's what I'll say about Ghostbusters specifically as a filmmaker. This film shouldn't work. Really, it shouldn't work. It's simultaneously a comedy, a horror film, a science fiction film, a New York City love letter, a workplace buddy movie. It has no right to be coherent, let alone this extraordinary. And yet, every single element of this movie lands perfectly. The comedy is genuinely funny. The horror is genuinely spooky and scary. The mythology is consistent in its world. That's a big old Twinkie right there. The characters are completely distinct. Everything is completely lovable and memorable about this movie. The Ghostbusters theme, Ray Parker Jr., setting in that theater in the summer of 1984, hearing that for the first time was a whole other level. Ghostbusters has generated sequels across 4 decades. It's still a living franchise today with the original characters, and the original remains, without question, one of the 10 purely most entertaining and memorable films ever made. And then 1984 did something else. It continued a franchise and brought us Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, darker, stranger, more horror-like, more visceral than the original Raiders, a completely misunderstood movie that critics who wanted Raiders and got something almost horror just genuinely didn't understand. Temple of Doom is literally Spielberg making a horror film inside an adventure franchise, and sort of trusting his audience to follow him along for the ride. The minecart sequence, the heart removal sequence, Short Round, Willie Scott's opera singing at the beginning at Club Obi-Wan, all in context of genuinely what becomes a horror film, a gross out film in parts. The film is so intense, so genuinely disturbing in parts, and it has such high stakes that it directly helped create the PG-13 rating. Steven Spielberg called Jack Valenti personally and lobbied for a rating between PG and R, so Temple of Doom could have it because it needed something that didn't exist yet. He was on that same track with Gremlins. That was another movie Spielberg involves, so he put his strength towards getting the MPAA to give him something completely new. And you think about that. His Spielberg in this films changed the rating system. PG-13 was created in 1984. Temple of Doom got it. Gremlins got it. So did Red Dawn. Hollywood markets the film as PG-13, and that is legendary ever since, because that rating has brought you so many in-between films that otherwise you might never have seen. And then there's the actual highest grossing film of 1984, Beverly Hills Cop. Now, this is the movie that Eddie Murphy passed up Ghostbusters to take on, and it launched a franchise that's still making movies as of just a couple of years ago. Eddie Murphy at the peak of his powers as a young guy, and this film proved that the whole buddy cop, even though he didn't really have a buddy, it had that whole sort of formula vibe, comedy, action, Lethal Weapon, Forerunner, all of that in here. And of course, you had him coming off of 48 Hours. He proved that a black lead could carry a film like this, coming off of 48 Hours and the other stuff that he had done. Beverly Hills Cop, #1 highest grossing of the year. Eddie Murphy operating at just all cylinders in this movie. A great soundtrack, great setting in California, and Beverly Hills Cop launched that franchise. It's still making money. All of that, it became culturally relevant. The heat is on the street, and it started in 1984. And then there were the movies that invented new fears, because 1984 didn't just give us comedy, it didn't just give us adventure or genre blenders, it gave us films that created entirely new categories of fear in the horror and sci-fi genres that are still launching things today. And the first one is The Terminator. James Cameron, his first major film, Arnold Schwarzenegger as a machine sent back from the future to kill a woman before she can give birth to the man who will save humanity. Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, iconic, one of the best, strongest female protagonists in the history of action cinema. Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese, carrying the weight of the future on his shoulders. And then here is Arnold, off of Conan, doing the Terminator as a bad guy in a way something had never been done before, because it's terrifying. It's basically a slasher film, and it worked perfectly. The Terminator makes no mistakes. He doesn't get tired. He will never stop coming for you, and that sort of certainty is just terrifying. It's a specific fear, a fear of a machine that's smarter, faster, and unrelenting, and can get you when you have to stop. That is something that is coming back, is a concern now, so it's still even more relevant. And James Cameron put it all on screen in 1984 for $11 million, and the Terminator franchise has generated billions upon billions across multiple films. The original remains a masterpiece of lean, efficient horror and sci-fi action filmmaking, and it started in 1984, but it wasn't alone. 1984 also brought us a new nightmare with A Nightmare on Elm Street by Wes Craven, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, and the film did something no other horror film had ever done. It made sleep dangerous. I have famously said this is the first horror movie I really remember seeing, and in 1984, as a little kid, watching this, it was terrifying because you could not escape Freddy. If you went to sleep, he could get you. I could avoid Michael Myers if I stayed out of Haddonfield. I could afford Jason if I stayed away from Crystal Lake. But as a kid, your mind logic says, I can't avoid Freddy Krueger because I got to go to sleep at some point. But the specific inescapability of that made it terrifying in a way that no other horror film had been. In the visual imagery, the dream logic of the movies, it launched one of the most successful horror franchises in the history of cinema. Robert Englund became a cultural icon, still is to this day. It gave us a young Johnny Depp in his first role. So between Terminator and Nightmare on Elm Street, released the same year, man, those have still been so culturally relevant. They're still not only being talked about, they're launching sequels, reboots, reimagining that are all still being explored today, and it started in 1984. And now we also have to talk about the movie that sort of defined a generation. And whether you are a young Gen Xer, like you came in right at the end of Gen X, or you came in right at the beginning of becoming a millennial, right there in that late 70s, early 80s crossover time, the Zennial generation, there is nothing like the NeverEnding Story. And this is where kids found out who they were and what storytelling meant. And this is a section that is personal to me because this is the first film that I genuinely remember sitting in a movie theater and seeing. Not just being taken to, but actually sitting through, watching, remembering, absorbing, and completely understanding to the point where I went home and told my grandmother all about it, to the point where the rest of my life she always joked at me because she said she never needed to see the movie because I told her and acted it out word for word. And that's what happens. It completely transported you to Fantasia, this whole other world. 80s movies had this special power to do that, and none more than the NeverEnding Story. Wolfgang Peterson directing, Noah Hathaway as Atreyu, Barrett Oliver as Bastian, call my name. A film that understood something about childhood that most children's films are too afraid to say out loud, and that is that reality is not enough. It can't contain a child or a child's imagination. Bastian is a boy being bullied. He's lost his mother. He's a boy who is retreated into himself and into books because the world inside the books, inside his imagination, is safer and truer to him than the world that is outside. And then he finds a book called The NeverEnding Story. And the book is alive, like literally alive. And the book is reading sort of back to him in a way, and he is pulled into the land of Fantasia, where a childlike empress is dying in the darkness. The nothing is consuming everything. The loss of imagination, the loss of innocence, the loss of belief is consuming everything, and it is called the nothing. Man, as a kid in 1984, the nothing was the most terrifying concept because you had never encountered anything like that. Something that wasn't a monster, not a villain in the traditional sense, with a face, just an absence. The taking away of hope, of imagination, of belief, of all of those things that make the world so wonderful and full of awe. The specific dread of a world where no imagination exists, where the emptiness is all that remains. I was sitting there in the theater and I remember it like it was yesterday. The NeverEnding Story gets overlooked because how emotionally overwhelming it can be, but the whole Artex scene and I thought I had strong hands, all of that. If you know, you know, but it told a generation of kids that stories you love are not an escape from the world. They are how our world survives. That imagination is not weakness, that it is something that is there that we need to love and embrace, and nothing can take that away. And it all started in 1984. And then there is a film that means a lot to me for a lot of different reasons. It is The Karate Kid. John G. Avildsen directing, Ralph Macchio, Daniel LaRusso, Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi, and of course you have Martin Kove as Sensei Kreese, who I got to direct in a film and get to know in my own film later in life. And that began in 1984. It's one of the best stories ever put on screen, though. And The Karate Kid understood that the journey was more important than the destination. That life is about balance, something that we really need to remember today. The wax on, wax off, the patience, the paint the fence, the paint the house, a specific kind of wisdom that we don't get anymore. Pat Morita won an Academy Award for this movie. The Karate Kid has spawned sequels, remakes, and of course Cobra Kai, a show that was a huge hit because all of those things were so important and they brought back the nostalgia, and it was just like being in 1984 again. And then you had 16 Candles, John Hughes, Molly Ringwald. This really set up John Hughes and the whole Molly Ringwald collaboration. It's a very kind of different coming of age story. It kind of gets poo-pooed on now. It's not as politically correct anymore. People call it problematic. It was not that in 1984. It was fun. It was a teen film hit in an era of big teen films, and it was way more complex than it was given credit for, as was most John Hughes films. In 1984 had plenty of films like that, and if you want to talk about films from 1984 that were culturally relevant, still are, but are attacked for being problematic, look no further than Revenge of the Nerds. 1984 was not nervous about making a film like Revenge of the Nerds. It was about the nerds outcasts who win, band together, overcome, not by learning to fit in, but by being exactly who they are. It was smarter, more creative than most things. Yes, it had the raunchy factor. Yes, it had the questionable parts that people don't like now, but it refused to apologize for any of it, and that's why it's still so memorable. It wasn't trying to rush and polish off the rough edges. It's about a specific dignity for people who earn their place, whether you like it or not. And that's what Revenge of the Nerds is, but now it's canceled before you can even get to that important part of the story. But in 1984, it blared "We Are the Champions," and it was a really fun time. Legendary comedy. And then you have the American exceptionalism that rightfully so ran wild in the 80s, like Hulkamania did, with Red Dawn and John Milius, Patrick Swayze, C. Thomas Howell, Charlie Sheen, Jennifer Grey. And this is also the first film ever actually released with the PG-13. It didn't get the rating first, but it was the first one released with the PG-13 rating in the same year as Temple of Doom and stuff. You've got Soviet and Cuban forces who invade America, and Red Dawn is specific about the cultural moment there with, like I said, the American exceptionalism. You have these teens that realize that their world is being attacked, and it is worth fighting for, dying for, and to really stand up in the face of World War III is essentially what happened, and save the country that they love so much. And it did it with a straight face in all the seriousness. These weren't people who were protected by plot armor. This was real. This was John Milius telling a story. Red Dawn, very, very effective. And then you get movies like Purple Rain and Prince. Listen, there's more movies from 1984 than I can even start off. But Purple Rain, Academy Award for Best Original Song this year. Great 4K of this movie out. Extraordinary concert sequences. All of that. You got When Doves Cry, Let's Go Crazy. Emotionally just kind of strong track here. And this movie is still it was so popular. And when I was a kid, I was like, man, this movie is like one long, awesome music video. But it is one that is culturally still relevant. Coming out of 1984, music was so important in 80s movies. Purple Rain kind of captured all of that. you got to talk it when you talk 1984. And like I said, I can't even begin to get to all the movies in 1984. There's more movies in this year than you would even imagine possible to come out in a year, that not just movies coming out, but movies everybody knows and has heard of that are so popular. There's cult films, because 1984 wasn't just about blockbusters. It was about teen films, horror, franchise, cult films. 1984 is one of the greatest cult film years ever recorded in cinema. Gremlins, Joe Dante and Spielberg basically making a cult film that became a blockbuster, and it exists in that weird tonal space between monster movie, scary movie, kind of bloody, gory in places, and then like a family movie and Christmas movie, something a studio wouldn't attempt today. Genuinely funny, scary, gross, all at the same time. Gremlins gave us Gizmo, who is a cultural icon to this day, basically ripped off with Grogu in Mandalorian, and Hollywood brought all this to you under Spielberg, so it made it okay, and it's something they probably wouldn't do today. But the blender scene, the microwave scene, the Santa dad scene, this would not fly today, but it did in 1984, straddling that cult film and blockbuster line. But then you get true horror cult films like my favorite Friday the 13th movie of all time, The Final Chapter. Joseph Zito directing this movie, an entry into the horror community that felt like a perfect sampling of everything that the Friday the 13th franchise was and ever was gonna be. Corey Feldman bringing 80s vibes as Tommy Jarvis, Crispin Glover in here doing crazy dances. You got the Doublemint twins, great kills, makeup effects, Jason being supposedly permanently gone at the end of this series. You've got basically Feldman playing a young Tom Savini who came back to do the practical effects. Just incredible Friday the 13th film. And if you look at the rankings of films from that year, it might not even be in the top 100. That's how crazy it is. And the same thing with Night of the Comet, an underseen horror gem in here with Catherine Mary Stewart, where a comet passes over Earth and humanity kind of gets zombified, and the girls it's very 80s. They got to survive in a mall and fight back. There's arcade sequences. Kelly Maroney, another cult film star in here. Catherine Mary Stewart, beautiful, doing the heavy lifting in here. Love this movie. And then you get Starman from the same year. John Carpenter doing a movie with Jeff Bridges that is completely different from anything else, but still awesome. Jeff Bridges received an Academy Award nomination for Starman. That is a sci-fi sort of story taking a whole other step that happened in 1984. And then you get something like The Last Starfighter that brings in arcade culture, sci-fi culture, Star Wars culture, blends it all together into like an 80s time capsule that was directed by Michael Myers himself, Nick Castle. The CGI and stuff they were using was primitive. It didn't matter. It resonated with an entire generation. Starman did. And then you get something like Dune, completely going off the reservation with David Lynch, bringing Frank Herbert's supposedly unfilmable novel to life in a cast with Kyle MacLachlan, Sean Young, Max von Sydow, Patrick Stewart. Crazy, weird movie, much like any David Lynch film, but it is still relevant. They're still making Dune films today. And again, it all started in 1984. And then here's where things go off screen just a little bit, but they really have an effect on what you saw on screen, because that's part of all this. And 1984 was extraordinary when you think about things like this, because here off screen you had Michael Eisner come in and take over Disney. September 1984, Michael Eisner left Paramount Pictures, where he had overseen the production of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Beverly Hills Cop, Footloose, 16 Candles, dozens, countless other movies that were huge in the era, and he became the chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company. And in 1984, Disney was genuinely in a crisis, much like they are now. The animation division had not produced a hit in years. The theme parks were stagnant. The company was a takeover target. They were having to fight off takeovers. Michael Eisner changed everything. Eisner launched Touchstone Pictures, which allowed the studio to make adult movies, not adult films, but movies for grown-ups under a separate label. He oversaw the development of The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. The Disney Renaissance that we all think of began in 1984, that era that defined what we think of now as Disney animation. He transformed Disney World, Disneyland completely into economic powerhouses. He expanded them with new parks, new rides. He built ESPN into a valuable sports media conglomerate that is still there today. Every Disney film that your children love, probably that you love, every Disney theme park experience that defines what a family vacation is for so many people, every Marvel film, everything that Disney has acquired since then, good or bad, every Star Wars thing, everything, every Pixar partnership, it started in 1984 because Disney was on the brink of going away before Michael Eisner. That is one of the most consequential things to happen in pop culture in the history of entertainment. And then for all my physical media fans, my friends that grew up going to video rental stores, mom and pop video rental stores, getting to finally see movies at home the way you wanted, the Criterion Collection launched doing laser discs in 1984. And the first titles they brought, you had Citizen Kane, you had the original King Kong restored in a genuine reverence for the film. So anyone who doesn't know their history, Criterion was founded with a single radical idea that films deserve to be presented with the same care and the same respect and context of any other art form. And that matters. They believe they should be preserved and all of that. Criterion's first Laserdisc coming out in 1984, and Criterion is still here today, dropping 4Ks, remastering films, saving films. So every boutique label being able to buy physical media at home, whether it is Arrow Video, Shout Studios, Scream Factory, Vinegar Syndrome, Kino Lorber, 88 Films, anything, maybe even the studios, who knows, it was all built around the Criterion that started in 1984. So our love for physical media had a birthday around there. So let's add this up. You've got 1984, you get Ghostbusters, you get Beverly Hills Cop, you get Terminator, you get Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you get Nightmare on Elm Street, you get Friday the 13th Final Chapter, The Karate Kid, The NeverEnding Story, Purple Rain, 16 Candles, Revenge of the Nerds, Red Dawn, Gremlins, Night of the Comet, Starman, The Last Starfighter, Dune, Police Academy. There's like endless ones that come out in 1984. You could just go on and on and on. You get the Criterion Collection launching, establishing that for film. You get Michael Eisner taking over Disney and everything that happened. That is so much in one calendar year. I made the argument for 1982, and I stand by everything I said about 1982. Extraordinary year. E.T., Blade Runner, The Thing, Poltergeist, Officer and a Gentleman, Rocky III. That year had some great film lineups. 1982 gave us great films. 1984 gave us not only great films and franchise starters, 1984 changed the industry and pop culture forever, and it's still shaping things we see, watch, use, and buy today when it comes to movies, entertainment, and pop culture. That is why I will argue, I'm going to do other years too, but I will argue it is my belief, and I just don't see it changing, that 1984 is the single greatest year in the history of pop culture. But I want to know what you think. What years are you thinking of? I know that I have some more that I'm going to do, but I just don't see anything topping all the cultural relevance of 1984. So Ghostbusters, The Terminator, Nightmare on Elm Street, Karate Kid, NeverEnding Story, all of those things, one year, 40 plus years ago, and we're still living in the world that 1984 built, and that's not a coincidence. That is 1984. So if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and ring the bell so that you don't miss any other videos. If you enjoyed what I'm doing here and want to help support a little more, you can use the Patreon link below. You'll get special members only videos there, discussions, and your name and lights on every single video. I usually update that about once a month, and everything helps the channel, and I really do appreciate it. But until next time, be kind, rewind like always. This is Chase with AV Pop Culture, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.
I know.